Let us prepare our hearts for prayer. Holy God, the great I am that I am, creator of life, the beginning and the end, bless our time together, that through our dialogue, sharing, and testimonies, that your will and your way will be made clear for your glory and for your kingdom that is and is to come. Open our eyes to hear the language and sounds of the kingdom that sheds light in darkness. Open our eyes to behold the truth that is ever before us. Empower your people with your Holy Spirit that imparts the strength to wait upon you, to trust in you, and proclaim and declare and decree justice to roll like a mighty river. I pray that we see each other the way you see us, all human beings made in the image of God and so therefore sacred. We honor you by standing together, acknowledging what is wrong and embracing love and hope to behold how we make things right. May the signs and wonders and power and deed be the fruit of our labor, that you may smile upon us. For thy kingdom is and is to come. We pray this in your holy, righteous name, your Son, Jesus, who gave his life for each and every one of us. Amen.
Amen.
Hello, all. I will be reading from Matthew 25, verse 36. I'll be reading from the New International Version because that's the version that I like. So here we go. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. I'm going to read it one more time. And when I say prison, I want to speak of the modern day prisons that some folks are in. Whether it be spiritual, whether it be social, economical. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison. I was dealing with racism. I was dealing with classism. I was in a prison of injustice that I did not deserve. And you came to visit me. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Welcome everyone here. It's such a privilege, it's such an honor to see all of your faces on tonight. I thank God for my parish leader who is here, Reverend Bob Knagle. And I thank God for the Harmony leadership. You heard from Reverend Jeremiah Paul, who is pastor of Camden Plains. You've heard from Pastor Valerie Paul Greenaway, who's pastor of UMC in Cornwall. You've heard from Reverend Wendy, who sings that beautiful song on entry, who is pastor of Kings Highway. And you will be hearing from Sharon Linnea, who's also part of our Harmony leadership, who is a best-selling author. And please look her up, Sharon Linnea. She writes an Eden series, and she writes some wonderful murder mystery stories as well. So we thank God for the Harmony leadership, but I thank God for our guest speakers as well. Pat Spear, who is the coordinator of the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. He's with us on tonight. And our honored guest, who is our main author speaker, Dr. Herron Gaston. And I'm going to, Dr. Gaston, can you just greet everyone and say hello right before I read your bio?
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Herron Gaston, for those of you who have not met me, the pastor at Summerfield United Methodist Church in Bridgeport. I'm delighted to be here and look forward to the conversation ahead.
I'm going to share with you Gaston's, Reverend Dr. Gaston's bio, formerly serving as the Associate Director of Missions and Recruitment, as well as Dean's Designee for the Title VI program at the Yale Divinity School of Yale University since 2015. The first African-American to hold this position in the history of Yale, Dr. Gaston is credited as a key contributor to the school's success in attracting several of the most diverse classes in the Yale Divinity School that the Yale Divinity School has ever had. Dr. Gaston is also a provisional elder in the New York Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, having pastored Somerville United Methodist Church for the past 6 years, supported by a 17-year career in ministry, public service, and civic engagement. He is also a distinguished member of his community and was named the Connecticut General Assembly's 100 Men of Color. Further, he was named 40th under the 40 Trailblazers in the state of Connecticut and received a Man of Distinction Award by Stanford NAACP and received recognition on Capitol Hill by Congressman Jim Himes. Notably, Dr. Gaston also has received proclamations from the city of New Haven, the city of Bridgeport, the town of Stratford, U.S. Congress, and the state of Connecticut for exemplary leadership in public service. Attending Florida A&M University, Dr. Gaston received both a Bachelor's of Art in Political Science and Pre-Law and a Master's of Art in Social Sciences and Political Science and Public Administration. He holds a Master's of Divinity and a Master of Sacred Theology from Yale University and a Doctor of Ministry from Andover Newton Seminary at Yale University. Additionally, he holds a certificate from Yale University in the Science of Well-being and a certificate in Human Rights from University of Oxford Consortium on Human Rights. Further, Dr. Gaston is currently a third-year law student at Quinnipiac University School of Law. Additionally, Dr. Gaston has gained valuable expertise abroad during his studies in France, El Salvador, Costa Rica, St. Lucia, and Puerto Rico, broadening his horizons on religious and professional levels. Dr. Gaston is also the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Bridgeport, an administrative arm of the Mayor's Office, where he oversees the day-to-day operations of Connecticut's largest city. Since 2013, Dr. Gaston has also been a senior educational criminal justice consultant and a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer of human resources management for the Gaston Justice Coalition, LLC. Before affiliating in his various community-driven roles, Dr. Gaston commenced his career in 2005 in Tallahassee, Florida, as an Associate Director of Diversity, Health, and Wellness at Project CUSH, C-U-S-H, from 2007 to 2009. He continued his career as a Senior Assistant Lobbyist and Advisor to the President of the Affirmative Action Committee for the Public Affairs Consultants, Incorporated. Dr. Gaston also served as the Executive Officer of the Governor as a legislative analyst and later a legislative assistant for the Florida Department of Corrections. And between 2008 and 2010, he found success as a Senior Administrative Assistant of Admissions at Florida A&M University. For 1 year, he excelled as the Senior Director of Community Equity and Deputy Chief and Staff and Human Resources Management on behalf of the Health Promotion Programs Initiative, Incorporated. In 2012, Dr. Gaston commenced his service at Yale University as an admissions assistant of Divinity School until 2015, and was additionally a teaching assistant at Gateway Community College in New Haven from 2014 to 2016. Dr. Gaston has intervened on Capitol Hill for the late Honorable Congressman John Lewis. He served as the Gubernatorial Fellow of the Honorable Congressman Charlie Crist, then Governor of Florida. Dr. Gaston has also entered for Congressman Al Lawson, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, and late Larcenia Bullard, who served in the House of Representatives in Florida. I'm going to stop there because we can see that we are well equipped to learn and to glean knowledge and education and become aware of the social justice in regards to mass incarceration from our honored author guest, Dr. Reverend Gaston Herron. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We're going to get right into our questions, unless and Dr. Gaston, please, at any point, if you want to say anything or if you want to start, let me know, because the floor is really yours.
Okay, so I'll start just to kind of give some contextualization to the conversation, and then I'll take the questions. So I think that's sort of the format that I'll feel most comfortable. Once again, thanks so much for having me on this evening. I'm incredibly excited to talk to you all about something that I'm extremely passionate about, and I know that this is certainly the work of the church. What really got me involved in this work is at the commencement of my collegial academic journey at Florida Agricultural Mechanical University. I became passionate about criminal justice reform in the state of Florida. This led me to become a lobbyist at Public Affairs Consultants. It was one of the state's largest lobbying firms, where we tackled issues of immigration, education, and criminal justice reform. It was through my lobbying efforts that I crafted a bill in Florida that helped to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, particularly in the inner cities of Florida. And I defended a proposal successfully before the Florida legislature, and we were able to help change the laws around juveniles going into the larger criminal justice system. And so after having found success in doing that, I began working at the Florida Department of Corrections and Reentry. I was the first African-American person to hold that position in the history of Florida, where I was the Director of Reentry Affairs, helping formerly incarcerated persons reintegrate back into society. And from there, the then governor of Florida, who's now a congressman, Congressman Charlie Crist, appointed me at the time to be a part of the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And essentially, I worked hand in glove with the Juvenile Justice Department there in helping work with principals and high school teachers, middle school teachers, in deterring students away from the juvenile justice system for behavioral issues, and took the school resource officers out of the schools and many of the schools in the inner cities and replaced them with additional support staff, where students could actually be disciplined by principals and deans opposed to being disciplined by the police. And so as a part of this incredible victory, I was offered a position in the governor's office to work again directly with the Florida Department of Corrections, and was a liaison with the governor's office in the state of Florida. And so with that, I worked in that area, and really the governor at the time said to me, "Herron, you have so many incredible gifts and skills in terms of being able to reach formerly incarcerated persons very effectively. Have you ever thought about going to divinity school?" And I'm like, "What the heck is divinity school?" So I started Googling divinity schools, and I came across Yale and Harvard. And I said, "Well, God, you do have a sense of humor. I'm going to apply to 2 divinity schools. I'm going to apply to 7 law schools, and I'm going to see what happens." And so I put God to the test, and I applied to 2 divinity schools and 7 law schools. And I said, "God, if you really want me to go to law school, I want you to open up those doors. If you want me to go to divinity school, open that door. If you don't want me to go to law school, close all of the doors, because I have a hard time of understanding. So please make it as plain as possible." And so I applied to 7 law schools, 2 divinity schools. I got denied that year from every single law school imaginable, even after having graduated summa cum laude and having 2 master's degrees and a bachelor's degree at that point. And I put in an application to Yale Divinity School, and that was the first school I heard back from. And I was also subsequently admitted to Harvard. So it was even more clear that this was a path that God had me on. And so the questions by which I was guided in relation to this subject matter around mass incarceration were threefold. And the 3 questions that I posed to myself, but also the 3 questions that I felt that I was guided from the Holy Spirit to ask was, what would it look like, if the church and the criminal justice system were in the business of restoring the relationships between the community, the victim, and the offender, and invested in repairing the harm caused by crime, instead of locking people up, throwing away the key, and resigning them to a perpetual state of systemic poverty. And the second question I was beginning to ask is, what should the moral and compassionate response of the church be towards formerly incarcerated individuals who have been relegated to the margins? And thirdly, the question that I asked that kept me up at night was, what does reconciliation and unadulterated forgiveness look like in the context of the church for those who have been accused of breaking the law, whether biblical or secular? And what role does the church have in restoring one back to one's respective community? And to make a long story short, these fundamental questions is what guided my research and sustained me as a public intellectual and criminal justice reformer. Mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex has changed the potential of so many and have created a permanent caste system of underclass citizens, and with one goal in mind, which is to maintain the demonic vestiges of white supremacy and systemic and structural racism, and to keep the foot of oppression tightly squeezed around the necks of those most vulnerable to the opportunistic threats of discriminatory apartheid visited upon Black bodies in order to keep them socially and economically paralytic. And no person of color in America is exempt from its bitter grip and debilitating impact. And irrespective of one's education, your pedigree, your socioeconomic background, your ethnicity, your country of origin, your gender identity, your religious affiliation, where one chooses to live, who one chooses to love, or social standing in our society. If your skin has been kissed by the sun, and particularly if you are Black, you fall victim to this criminal justice system that we have. So many of you already know the statistics. I don't need to really get into all the statistics, but I think that it's important sort of for the anchoring of this conversation so that we can kind of get a good glimpse of what this system actually does to entire groups of people in our country. So the United States has the largest prison population in the world. We house about 1.8 million people in some form of custody, with 100,000 people in federal prison. 1.1 million of those folks are in state prisons, and 600,000 of them are in local prisons. Most of these inmates, they're Black or they're brown. And regardless of the gains that we've made in America, by African Americans in particular, the statistics seem alarming as to what can be expected to befall many African Americans and their families via the criminal justice system. And what we have to look at is the fact that there are more African Americans under supervision or control of the correctional system today than there were in 1850 and 1860. There are more African Americans incarcerated in the United States, making up about 40 to 60% of the inmates are African American. And in 1954, this was the year of the historic Brown versus Board of Education decision. About 100,000 African Americans were incarcerated in American prisons and jails. And following that decision, there has been a half a century of enhanced opportunity for many people for whom it had previously been denied. And a significant number of people of color have gained leaderships in society. Yet despite this sustained progress within the criminal justice system, the figure of 100,000 incarcerated African Americans has now escalated to nearly 900,000 inmates that are African American. And the scale of these developments can be most seen most visibly in research findings from the Department of Justice. And the current trend indicates that 1 in every African American male born today can expect to spend at least some point in time in their life in prison. 1 in 6 Latinos today, compared to 1 in 17 whites, will be incarcerated at some point in time in their life. The African American female is the second largest growing population of inmates in the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but that it bends towards justice. But what we see is that the pendulum swings sometimes in the opposite direction. Sometimes it swings too far to the left, and sometimes it swings too far to the right. And that's why the church is crucially important in helping to bring us back to the center. As we have seen and as we know, when we make racial progress in this country, oftentimes it is followed by racial regress. So that's how you can get a Barack Obama, and then you can turn around and get a Donald Trump. It's not necessarily about the politics, it is about the policies. And it's about racism and systemic and structural institutional racism that causes us to be in the position that we are in today. So this brings me to talk about the issue with me. So for example, in 2010, I was a student at the Yale Divinity School, and I was falsely accused of a crime in Florida, and I was subsequently arrested. So this was during my first semester at Yale. I experienced a tumultuous and life-altering event. I was falsely accused of a crime in Florida for which I was later arrested on Yale's campus. I found myself on the other side of the prison bars after having worked at the Florida Department of Correction, being a decorated student, being a student also at Yale University, thought I was at the pivotal height of my academic trajectory, and this happened. That's how you can see those statistics really being true. 1 in 3 African Americans will be arrested in their lifetime, regardless of their pedigree or their educational status. But this experience enlivened me with rage, anger, disappointment, and profound sadness. For the first time, I was experiencing the criminal justice system from the inside out, up close and personal. Therefore, I can speak to the criminal justice system from both sides, having served as in a managerial capacity within corrections and having been serviced by the correctional institution as an inmate. As a Black man in America, I have experienced all too often the ease with which young Black men who look like me fall under the crushing yoke of injustice from an inherently racist and biased criminal justice system. And in the 21st century America, the stakes are high and we must work tirelessly to put an end to the prison industrial complex, which ensnares disproportionately vulnerable communities of color. And although I was falsely accused of a crime I did not commit, being Black automatically labels you with a Black mark. And the mere fact that you were implicated as a potential for breaking the law, there are lifelong suspicions and questionable clouds that hover over you for the rest of your life. And while many may look at that and say, I've read your bio, I've heard your bio, it seems that you've been able to break through the glass ceiling. I want you to know that that has been an arduous and a very difficult task. Almost it's like moving mountains. Yale University, while I was sitting in the jail, sent me a handwritten letter. And the handwritten letter said, and I kept it, that if you are charged with this crime, and in fact, if you are convicted, you are not fit for the ministry. Before I had a case, before it was going through the judicial system, my case was attempted to be adjudicated through the court of public opinion by a powerful institution that had dismissed me from the campus. And not just that, to add insult to injury, I went through the system for over 9 months, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The state had absolutely nothing, but they tarred me, they marred my life for 9 months. Imagine the agony, the pain, the frustration, the profound sense of sadness that I felt. And subsequently, I was exonerated. And the judge said, now you can just go back to school. But what about the collateral damages, the collateral consequences of what it meant to have been falsely accused, to have my dignity assaulted, and to have my character questioned in such a foul and evil and demonic way? So with that being said, I came out of the criminal justice system. I went back to Yale, but that wasn't easy. 28 newspapers had written about the situation, and I had to fight for 8 long years by myself to get 28 newspapers to take them down. Every year, I would get on the phone and I'll say, I need you to take these articles down. These are defamatory articles that are keeping me from moving forward with my life. Every job that I'd applied to would send me back something saying, thank you so much for applying, but we've went with another candidate. And I had some inside intel that let me know that the reason that my application was denied was because of what they read on the internet, the digital footprint of what that incarceration experience did. It left a digital mark. And for year after year after year, I had to relive that story over and over again, which caused me to write the book From Jail to Yale, an incarceration memoir from jail to Yale. So I've talked quite a bit, but I think that at least gave you some context and gave you an indication into the story. For those of you who like to read more about it, certainly I hope that you'll pick up the book to read it. but I would love to engage this time with the audience that may have specific questions regarding the story and or perhaps things that churches, organizations can do to address this issue of mass incarceration.
Thank you so much for sharing powerful testimony. When you talk about the statistics and you talk about how many people have that are incarcerated, do you know the numbers? Because when I say numbers, in the way that I see it is kind of like it's been compared to like the new Jim Crow, and what that means that some people may not understand is each body, the state or the country makes money from.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about those? Do you know any of those numbers? I think
Yes.
It's like.
So those numbers are actually, they're high. I mean, folks are making astronomical amounts of money, but behind the control of Black and brown bodies. When you look in this country to see where our prisons and our jails are built, most of them are in the suburbs. Most of them are not in the inner city. And so many folks who live in the suburbs, often their skin doesn't look like it's been kissed by the sun. They're the ones that are the prison guards. They are the correctional officers. Many of the judges live in those areas, in those districts. Many of the politicians that run for office, as sad as it is, they get representation from the numbers of those individuals who are behind bars, but yet those folks don't have a voice. In 1996, the average cost of housing a federal prisoner was $23,500, while a state prison inmate costs $20,100 to house. These amounts compared to the cost of tuition at a prestigious university far exceed the TANF allowance for a mother with 2 children, or the cost of a public education. Hence, it is cheaper to send an inmate to Yale than it is to send them to jail. We have to ask ourselves, why are we more willing to incarcerate someone than we are to educate them? Statistics show that more educated people tend to commit less egregious street level crimes in our society. And that when one person succeeds, that we all succeed. Let us remember that this is not a Black problem or a white problem or a brown problem or a yellow problem, but by virtue of us all coexisting on these shores, this is a problem for all of us. The nefarious sting of racism is something that impacts us, whether you're Black, whether you're white, whether you're pink, whether you're yellow, but those numbers are true. It literally costs over $100,000 a year to have someone behind bars than for us to actually do something rehabilitative, to give people knowledge, skills, and abilities to pick themselves up from systemic poverty, because we know that there's a correlation between poverty and crime. And we also know that there's a correlation between many of those folks who are incarcerated and mental illness. And so what we've done in this country is that we have penalized and criminalized mental illness, opposed to having a model of treatment. We have a model of retributive justice. So those are just some of the numbers, but I think that it gives us at least an overview of just how much it costs to house one inmate.
Sharon has a question, and Valerie, I'm going to ask you to come back to that, because I want to break down even, that $100,000 that each inmate brings into that jail system. How does it, we want to see exactly how does it pay people's salaries, and why does this system continue? And how, we as a church, we really do need to be a little bit more active in uprooting that and changing that system. Sharon can't unmute. Oops. Okay. Sharon, forgive me for that. You should be able to now.
Hi. Yeah. I was having dinner with my father at the Golden Jade restaurant, in Pequannock Township in New Jersey a few years ago. And it was late, and we were almost the only ones there. There was one other white gentleman, middle-aged gentleman. And before my father and I were talking about world affairs. We were talking about everything. And as he left, the other gentleman came and stopped by our table and said to me, "You are so lucky that you can talk to your father about real stuff." He said, "My father is on salary from the Tea Party, as are many other people, and his job is to go, he is sent from place to place. Right now he's in Austin, Texas. He will be there from 2 to 3 months. And what he is doing is he is teaching them how to get white supremacists onto school boards and police forces. And he'll not only teach them, he'll stay there and start to get it started." And he said, I can't have another conversation that ends with my father saying, "I can't wait for the coming race war." And the thing that was so eye-opening and frightening to me about that was it just how coordinated this is, how orchestrated this is. This is not just, mean people doing things. This is not just back with the KKK. This is what's going on today. And these people are on salary. They have benefits. They've got medical. And so, one of my questions for you, Dr. Gaston, was, do you think that your arrest was orchestrated, or was it simply mistaken identity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think that my arrest was politically and racially motivated. And the reason that I say that is because this is the time of Obama, when folks in our country are beginning to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in a real way. And we start seeing more African Americans during that period of time starting to ascend to CEO, CAO positions of power, even in our state legislatures. And I got some good information after my arrest that spoke to that fact. The fact of the matter is, I was asked to work at the University of South Florida as the director of the Upward Bound program, which is a college reach out program for first generation college student considering college. And I had gone through that program when I was in high school. And I was just awarded, prior to working there that summer, I was awarded the Trio Scholars Award, and I was working in the governor's office. And at that time, the governor asked me, would I consider working down in the Tampa office to kind of help Upward Bound, because they were having some challenges and some managerial issues there. And I agreed to do that. And when I got there, I was met with a lot of resistance from sort of the leadership there, because they thought that I was coming to take over. And I had good reason to believe, based on the deposition of the student, that they were told by one of the leaders that they want to ensure that I did not come back to the program, because it looked as if I was going to be the person that was the handpick for the governor, and they did not want me there. So the student subsequently created a fictitious story indicating that we had sexual contact. And the woman who was over the program reported it to the police immediately. The police did not do their due diligence in following up. They arrested me without having any real probable cause. And therefore, because I was such a decorated student and had a lot of potential to run for public office, and I was speaking that I was going to be running for public office at some point in Florida, I think that this was a way to really blemish me and to sort of dirty me up, if you will, because I think that the folks who were in power, in the seat of power, saw me coming and wanted to make sure that they derailed that process. So I will say that's happening. Another thing that I want to speak to that you were talking about in your story, and thanks so much for sharing your story, because so many of these conversations happen all the time. But it's important that we also understand how our criminal justice system came to being. Our police departments across our country started out initially as slave patrols, especially in the South, the antebellum South, and then it continued to expand and grow. And many of the recruits to the police department were former members from the KKK. They were active members in the KKK, which was a white supremacist group that was charged with ensuring that they kept control in their communities from Black and brown people, and they visited upon them violence. So we have to look at the inception of our police departments, how they were formed, and know the history. Because if we don't know the history, we don't know our past. If we don't know our past, we don't know our present. And if we don't know our present, we don't know our future. And that's not to suggest that all police departments are racist and not doing a great job, but the origin of the police department started on the basis and foundation of racism, and for many years recruited individuals who were white supremacists within our police departments. And we see that some of those practices, some of those mores, some of those policies and procedures ensured that white officers continue to get a competitive edge in police recruitment. And we still have that same problem today, where African Americans and Latinos and Asians are having difficulties getting onto our police forces because of those policies that need to be revisited to open things up so that we do have a much more diverse and equitable kind of police departments that's reflective of the community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaston. I'm really looking forward to how we as a church can be empowered, because the experience happens more than what we understand. And Sharon, thank you for sharing your story, because when I heard that story for the first time, I can relate to your cry in this book, in your book, because before a pastor, I was a school principal at an all prestigious, a very affluent, only Black woman in the building. And a police officer arrested me for a traffic ticket in the parking lot at 7:30 in the morning, while I was 10 feet walking into the school building, with school students and teachers looking out the window. And that pain and that because you have, as a person, you worked to get to where you are. You put a lot of sweat, tears, time. So for something that, like that to happen to you, because people see you in a place of power and they just feel like you shouldn't be there because of the color of your skin, it's heartbreaking. So when I began to wail about it in the police car, the police officer said to me, why are you crying? You're not a criminal. And I said, well, look up at that window. You see those students looking out the window? You're not telling them that I'm a criminal. You're telling them I am, because you're in the parking lot of this building with your sirens on at 7:30 in the morning. And he had to release me, and I had to go and pay that ticket and go back to school. But it was racially imposed, and when people see you in a position, they want to bring you down, they will use their tools to do so. And when you know there's people in those offices that their motivation is to do just that, that means we as a church and a community really need to also strategize how to remove people who are supremacists from those places of power, because it's we can't move forward without us stepping up. My question, though, is in regards to the memoir. I love this memoir, and I love it because I related to it, to be honest. But I was wondering, was it difficult for you to tell your story in the rawness that it occurred? Was it difficult to you as a clergy person to use profanity through? Because you quoted the police officer exactly what they said. Did you think about if you would, do you receive kind of throwback from that? Do you receive any type of?
So when I was writing the book, I was also in seminary at the time. And of course, it took a lot of raw emotional material for me to write that, because each time that I tell the story, I have to relive that story and the trauma of what that story brings. And so it's painful, but nonetheless, it's important that the story is shared, because I think that it's difficult to teach what you don't know. And it's hard to lead where you won't go. And so because I've had those experiences, I think that I speak with a level of authenticity and a sense of realness that people can identify with, because all of us go through something in life. It may not be that particular experience, but we've had other experiences that I think that draw us to a place of compassion so that we can hear differently and we can feel and listen to the story of someone who's gone through something differently. So I would say that when I was writing it, I thought of myself a little bit more like Peter, cursing Peter. I'm half hood and half holy. God is still working on me. But I thought that it was important that people could see just how pissed off I was. I mean, I was pissed to the highest degree of pistivity. That's not even a word, but I'll create one. And I think that it's okay sometimes, for us to have righteous anger, to be pissed off about stuff, to be mad about it, so that because this is something that's very serious, and people need to know, that these kind of issues really impact people in real ways. And so I think that, just like James Baldwin said, sometimes violence or is the language of the unheard. Not that we're trying to justify it, but certainly, folks who are can't be heard, oftentimes come from an emotional place. And that's the way that you get people to listen. So when I started writing that, right, and I started sharing excerpts with people at the school about it, they heard it differently. And it got the attention of the administration at Yale. And then it got the attention of those folks in the public square that actually had power to help me to get the book out there so that other people can actually hear the story. So this was not a time for me to kind of be flowery and try to, sanitize it. I mean, it's funky. So the story need to be told in the way that it happened. And I let my church know that if this is not the pastor that you're looking for because you don't like what I wrote in my book, then you need to find another pastor.
Amen.
I hope that didn't shut down discourse.
Oh, no. No. We're with you.
I have a question.
Yep.
And you kind of answered it in a sense. But I'd like for you to just elaborate a little bit more on it. Can you please describe in detail how racism intertwines with mass incarceration, and then also systematically, does it continue to happen for Black and brown folks when we're talking about the criminalization of Black and brown folks? Can you just dive in that a little bit for me?
Yes. So one of the things that I will say, I think racism plays a pivotal role in racism has basically taken on a different shape. So we had to deal with Jim Crow Sr., right? The height of the 1960s and all of that. 1968, with the assassination of Dr. King, we started seeing a little bit more racial progress in a sense of Black people ascending to certain positions and being able to move outside of the Black space and into the white space. But then what we noticed is that, whites took white flight, out of communities from our institutions and caused us to sort of go from the HBCUs into the white space. And racism took on a different shape. So we had to start dealing with Jim Crow Jr. racism, where it couldn't necessarily be in your face in the same way that it was in the 60s, but they did in a very covert fashion, through laws, through policies, through red line, through voting, voter suppression, drawing districts and drawing lines, and denying, African Americans economic opportunities in this country to get housing and so on and so forth. And they used the criminal justice system to basically what I like to call it the invisible institution, where they would take mostly Black men at that time and they would incarcerate them, for anything. I mean, they had citizens arrest still on the books. And we saw that just more recently in places like Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, they just did away with citizens arrest, where a white man could stop a Black man at any time and engage him or her and arrest them, which gives rise to these sort of stand your ground laws that we see. Those laws have been on the book for many, 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 many years. And it's just an iteration of racism, Jim Crow and Jim Crow Jr. just taking on a different outfit. And we're dealing with the same kinds of things today. White males mostly are able to engage in violent acts with no impunity. And that's what the Stand Your Ground laws allowed for them to do. And we see that if a Black person or a brown person talk back to these individuals who are doing these citizens arrests, if you will, then they get charged with resisting arrest. And then they get charged with other kinds of crimes that fuel the justice system. And people in politics, we know that politics is the process by which we choose our elected officials and hold them accountable to the constituents they represent. And a lot of these areas where folks are running for office, I mean, they're using these dog whistle kind of rhetoric that galvanize a base of people that want to keep those laws, mores, and procedures the same. And so the more things change, the more things stay the same. And we see that even with our current president, Joe Biden, I mean, when he was in office in the 90s, he helped to fuel this prison industrial complex by putting $90 million over and over again into this pipeline. And he since then have come around and said, I noticed that was wrong. But at the time that it was happening, you know, intentions does not mitigate the impact that it has had on generations of African-American men and women who've had to endure those kind of policies. So to just speak to that, I mean, that's a way that racism, I think, takes on different manifestations, but I think that we can see it a little bit more principally now through the criminal justice system itself and through mass incarceration. So that's a long answer to a short question.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you. We talk about punishment, whether it be restorative or retributive. I don't know if I said that right. And how, you know, theologically we see the first killing of another, a violent crime, as Cain killed Abel, but the punishment was one that was restorative. God, you know, put a mark on him where no one would be able to harm him until his time was served or up. But my question in understanding that as Christians and how we have received, I want to say, a country where like all the furniture is in the room and all of it needs to be either thrown out and repurchased or completely moved around. But can you talk a little bit about privately owned businesses and how they make money off of the jail systems? And I know that, you know, when you talk about the telephone to all the different other things that they make money off of, and as I alluded to earlier, which you did comment on, can you share a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So a lot of money is being made by businesses and also other entities that work in conjunction with some of these prison organizations. Many of the folks that's behind bars, when we think about them, oftentimes we don't think that they are people with high level of skill sets, but they're incredibly creative and extremely talented. And so what the prisons do is they have those individuals helping to make things like machinery and telephones and things that you can't even imagine that's being sold in grocery stores and in retail stores and retail shops. And these businesses are getting a lot of these products made literally for free, right? So it's almost like slave wage. These inmates are making these products. These products are being shipped out to a lot of these businesses that therefore sell the stuff in their stores, and they're making considerable amount of profit behind that. And so a lot of folks don't make any fuss or stink about it because you can't see necessarily the people that's behind bars if that's not, in your purview, or if you don't have relatives or people in your family that are incarcerated, you don't think twice about who those folks are and how they are and what they're up to. So this is happening in real ways, and businesses are making a lot of money as a result of that. And also, I've recently heard in the state of Connecticut that some of these businesses, when people are about to come out of prison within 6 months, they'll bring some of these folks on board to work for them literally almost for free without having to pay them anything. And they continue to give their time, talent, service, gifts, and skills to those businesses. So that's just one way of the many different ways that businesses are taking advantage of those folks who are formerly incarcerated in our communities.
Silbert Welch, welcome, Dr. Gaston. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your input here. I've been listening, you know, every time I listen, it just points me in one direction: greed. I think, you know, everything, there's a famous Latin phrase that says, Felix velorum est cupiditas. You know, money or greed is root of all evils. And everything that happens just points right back to greed, you know. But I want to shift that a little bit and go back into something that you briefly alluded to earlier on. Based on your experience and expertise, how would you describe the mental health conditions of jails? You know, are they fit for rehabilitation, especially for those people who have been incarcerated for protracted periods? You know, how you know, is there any future for these people in terms from a mental aspect?
Right. Well, that's a great question. I think that the way in which our penal system is in the United States is that we have not built into the structure rehabilitative services for individuals. I think what we have is a model of locking people away and then throwing away the key. Just the way in which individuals are housed in jail. And for example, I'll just kind of walk you through what the average inmate goes through once they're in there. So when I first was arrested, they take you to what they call the S unit. The S unit essentially is when you're just going into intake and you're sort of a fresh person going into the judicial system. You're locked down for 23.5 hours a day. So you mean to tell me you take a person who's accustomed to being free, you lock them down for 23.5 hours a day. Depending on what you go in there for, they can lock you down and put you into solitary confinement, or you'll be with about 8 to 10 men in one room, locked down 23.5 hours a day, and 30 minutes you have literally to take a shower, to eat, and to make one phone call. So you could imagine just how quickly that 30-minute goes by. You can't see anything while you're inside. You can't see outside. So there are no windows. You don't know what time it is in the building or the facility. You just have to guess and gauge what time it is. After you stay in S unit for a couple of months, depending on how long you're there, they put you into what they call general population. When you go into general population, you're in there with hundreds of different men who are locked down. And you're locked down there at most times 22 to 23.5 hours a day with about 30 to 45 minutes of recreational time. And just imagine people who are in there for 5, 10, 15 years, what that has on our psyche. You're almost like a caged bird. And so because you've been such a prisoner in that way and you've adjusted to that kind of environment and lifestyle, even when you get out, you don't feel like you're free. It reminds us of the slaves. Whenever they came down and said, you know, you're now free, you can leave. A lot of the slaves say, oh, no, master, we want to stay with you. And that's because they had become so dependent on that kind of system. They didn't know that they can survive outside. So what happens is when these individuals are released, if they're ever released, and they come back out into society, they don't know how to use a telephone. They've never seen a cell phone before. They may not know how to use the internet. They don't know how to build a resume. They're not workforce ready. They're not prepared to go back into the workforce. Many of them have been marginalized from their families, from their communities. So they essentially go back in the community without the proper support and resources that therefore adds to the recidivism because they end up going back to jail. And what we do know is that if folks don't have adequate housing to go into when they first get out, they're likely not to be successful. And within the first 60 days, they're likely to go back into the criminal justice system in the first place. So no, we don't have a system of restorative justice. We actually have a very a crucial penal system. And we don't talk about the mental health aspects of what it means to be locked down for that long without proper rehabilitation. And I don't think that people ever truly get over that incarceral experience, because there are times that I actually have, nightmares about that experience. Of course, it took me a while. I was in therapy. And I think that every preacher needs a preacher, every therapist needs a therapist, every doctor needs a doctor. And I continue to engage myself in times where I feel like I myself need some therapy because of that crucial experience. And imagine, I wasn't there as long as many of the other people who are serving time are behind bars. So I can only imagine it's probably 10 or 15 times worse for them.
Thank you.
Reverend Gaston, I thank God for you, and I thank God for your humility, your love. It really does bring me to tears to know that there are many people behind these bars that shouldn't even be there. Mm-hmm. And, I'm praying that these conversations that we're having, that we can support you, we can support the work in the community. Pat Spear, we can support you and Gia. I'm praying that we can use every single one of our resources and our power and our passion to really bring down the systemic evil. I'm going to ask my question after Reverend Wendy, because my question is the last question. So I'm going to combine Sally's question with my question. And then the last question will be for Pat Spear to give us also some information about Gia. So Wendy, go ahead.
Okay, I have a double fold question, one for the audience, and then I am going to alter a little bit. I hope you guys can hear me. Can you hear me? Did I go out?
We hear you fine.
Okay. I may alter a little bit this question, Crystal, so I hope you don't mind. But I'm going to ask the audience, if we left this issue alone and we did nothing to fix it, will this issue ever solve itself? And I ask you to put your answers in the chat. All right. So that's just a question to think about. And the reason I heard you, Dr. Gaston, talking about mental health, and there was a case at the church that I was at, Herron United Methodist Church, where I had a young man who I knew clearly had mental illness for up to 10 years. I was visiting him in the hospital. At one point, he stopped eating to the point that his kidneys started to fail. So we knew he was very mentally ill. And we were trying to get him where they would have to give him the shot for medications, me and his mother. And sometime around Christmas, he went into a synagogue and he took a hatchet and he hurt people at this synagogue. And he was clearly mentally ill, but our president at the time said he was a domestic terrorist. And I felt the need to get up and speak back to that immediately. So I got on the news that day and said, he's mentally ill. This is not a domestic terrorist. And the leader of our nation is crazy. And they splattered him all over the news. And now the case is clear that he is mentally ill, that he's been mentally ill, that it's been proven that he's been mentally ill for all this time. My question to you is, what should we do? And why is it important for the church and the community to take this topic seriously? I bring up the situation that happened with one of my members, because for me, that was when the church came full throttle against, it was like the president was saying it. And here I am going, I can't let him say this without speaking back to it. But some folks in the church would say, Pastor Wendy, mind your business. Don't get involved with, this situation where it's political and where it's, we can't really clearly see what the situation is yet. But because I could clearly see the situation for what it was, I had to get involved. But there are some church folks who would say, you know, why should we get involved? Why should we even, as a church, do anything? So just want you to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. I think that we live in these two tensions where folks feel like that the church should only be taking on certain issues, and other issues that may become political or fraught, that churches should not take those controversial things on. I think that's the exact opposite of what the church actually is called to do. I think the church actually is called to be an angelic troublemaker in the community. And I know particularly, you know, when I think about the church, I think about the church universal, but particularly in my particularity as a Black person, I think about the Black church experience. And but for the Black church experience in this country, we would not have made such social progress that we've made today. And I can't help but to think about my dear fraternity brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, the list goes on, of those folks who were in our churches that helped to make this country what it is to become a better version of itself and challenge the status quo. Dr. King took the pulpit to secular spaces, and he called down and called out evil at the highest level. That's what the church actually is called to do, because those folks who are sitting in your pulpit or sitting in your pews, they're people who are hurting. They're people that's a part of communities. They have issues, they have challenges, they have issues paying their light bill, their water bill, their cable bill. Their kid may have gotten arrested and went to prison. And your job is to not just walk alongside those individuals, but to ensure justice. So I think that the work of the church is crucial in this area, because at the heart of the Christian gospel, many biblical characters about whom we teach, people like Jesus, Paul, John, Peter, in our modern context will be labeled felons today and will be considered unredeemable for the infractions that they themselves may have committed in their respective societies. And yet these are exemplars that we teach about and we're taught to emulate. Therefore, I think as a global church community, we have a moral and ethical obligation to practice what it is that we preach, you know, because behind those cell walls, we got mothers, we got fathers, daughters, husbands, wives, friends, neighbors, sisters, brothers, rich, poor, Black, white, everyone in between. All of these persons are made in the perfect image of God, and they are redeemable. And people think that the Christian prison ministries, you know, probably shouldn't exist in churches because, you know, it's a little bit too political. You know, I argue against that. I think that, you know, change does not happen from the top down, but it happens from the bottom up. And if the church is not out there being the moral voice, crying out in the wilderness, nothing is going to change. And so I think that, you know, the church has gotten scoliosis these days. You know, our backs are too far bent down that we can't stand up straight, and that the church have become nothing more than a museum for the saints instead of a hospital for those who are sick, those who are crying out, those who are desperate, those who are on the margins. That's what the church, I think, is called to do. And so, you know, we can go on and on and on about this, but, you know, the Gospel of Luke, you know, more principally, it provides us a framework for understanding social justice in Jesus's time. You know, it talks about how we should stand on the side of those who are poor and those who are disadvantaged. So this is the theological framework by which I engage in the practical application of ministry at Summerfield United Methodist Church. And Summerfield is in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And those of you who may know something about Bridgeport, we have about 70% of our people that live there are justice impacted. These are people who have family members who've gone to prison, or they themselves have gone to prison. This is a second chance community. And so if I don't get out there, if other people like me don't get out there speaking for opportunities on behalf of these individuals, we will create a permanent caste system of underclass citizens, not even lower class people, but people who just will not have a decent shot on opportunity at anything. And these are people who sit in my congregation. They're sitting in my pews. I see the hurt. I walk alongside them. And so I feel compelled to use my voice as a weapon against these evil and demonic forces that's designed to cripple and keep people in a perpetual state of poverty. So make a long story short, to your issue about the mental health concern, I think all of us are challenged with mental health. I mean, I think that's a buzzword we've been hearing a lot, especially now with COVID. I think everybody has some level of issue with mental health, right? I like to call people indigent because it's circumstantial in terms of how deep this thing could be with individuals. But it's interesting that when a Black or brown person is having an episode of mental health concern, it is demonized and it is criminalized in a different way than if a white boy decides that he's going to get up one day and go to school and wreak havoc on the school. First thing that we hear in our media is that person was having a mental health breakdown, a mental health episode. Basically what they're saying is he's a good kid. He just needs some, mental intervention. And I'm actually happy more so now than ever that we can actually put these things on the conversation table to say, why is it that when a white boy has an issue with mental health, we call it mental health and that he was a good kid. And we humanize that person. But if they're Black or brown, we dehumanize them. And so this is a time that I think we can also have some reckoning around that conversation of mental health, that mental health doesn't just affect white people. Mental health is something that affects all people. In fact, I think all Black people in this country are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome from racism. And that is a mental health crisis, racism itself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just telling one of our Harmony executive leaders that our next discussion is going to be racism as a mental health crisis. And because it has been now in legislation stated that that's what it is, what are the resources that's allocated to that purpose? But let's get back on tonight. This is our last question. We know that there's no harmony in ignoring this injustice. We know that we must find a harmonious approach, path forward in order to bring liberation for all of our sisters and brothers. You wrote a book called A Call for Action, Practically Reversing the Trends of Mass Incarceration. So how can we as the church be the repairers of the breach? What resources are available to us and what is presently being done? And I know that Pat Spear from GIA, he's going to be answering part of that question as well, telling us about the work of GIA in this greater Hartford area. But let's hear from you first, Dr. Gaston, and then we're going to give the floor to Pat Spear as well from GIA. We want to know, what can we do as a church and community to answer the call? Can you share some practical tools with us that we can use as pastors, as leaders in the church, as laity in the church, leaders of our community to answer this call?
Absolutely. And, of course, this is not going to be a one size fit all, but this is something that I think that I've seen as a model that works in Bridgeport and some of the other places that I've had an opportunity to work. I would argue that local churches can play a major role in the transformation of returning citizens. First, the church must be intentional in our mission and our prayers for restoration and renewal of incarcerated persons. The church must then go outside of the walls into the highways, the byways, and the local prisons, and to invite people to come into our churches. Churches must encourage and pray for those who are being released back into the community. And churches must not judge people based on their perceivable indiscretions. Churches must empower their laity to walk intentionally with people through the process of being reoriented back into the community. And we must pray for the systems of injustice and their many representations to be more just and more equitable, thus promoting human flourishing instead of engaging in degradation of humanitarian compassion. We must hold our politicians, our local officials accountable to the constituents and those folks that are members of our parishes and our congregation. In addition, churches must extend, I think, radical hospitality in the truest sense of its word. It is not enough to just pray for formerly incarcerated persons and leave them at the prayer altar, but churches must be willing to get their hands dirty. And in a lot of ways, I think COVID is showing us that the church is just not called to be behind the four walls. It is time now the church actually to be the church, and we're forced to do that now when we're contending with this virus of COVID-19. Churches should establish a connection with local correctional institutions. I think that churches could accomplish this goal by what we've been doing at Summerfield. We send birthday cards, Thanksgiving cards, Christmas cards, and we target this population specifically because we're intentional about reaching out to them. One, you can connect ex-offenders with drug rehabilitation treatment programs before they come out. You can engage the correctional system and making contact with people before they get out. And when you know they're going to be entering back into your community, your church could actually help to provide respite care for these individuals. At Summerfield, we provide a temporary 30-day emergency shelter for those that are released from prison within the last 30 days. We create healing communities where we bring certified counselors to work closely with ex-offenders in processing their past and envisioning a better way forward. So these are wraparound services that we have created that helps to address the needs of formerly incarcerated people in a very holistic sense. We need to be able to connect ex-offenders with jobs and employers in the local community. So things that churches can do is meet with your local businesses, and you can say to them, listen, you know, formerly incarcerated persons are human persons. They're coming back into our communities. It's safer, you know, when we give people an opportunity to be able to pick themselves up, not just from their own bootstraps. They're not asking for a handout. They're asking for a hand up. They need a job that would give them a livable wage, not just some menial job that's not going to give them but $15, $16 or $300 a week. But we're talking about something that's a little bit more substantive than that. Another thing churches need to do in terms of addressing this population is working with your colleges and university systems in your backyard. If they're not offering training program for formerly incarcerated individuals, put pressure on them to do so. You can work with your trade school organizations in your community to provide scholarship opportunities for people to get a trade. So when they come out, people have a skill and a gift in hand that they can help lift themselves up from poverty. Connect people with the housing authority or Section 8 programs that they may need. So these are just some basic things that churches actually can do. We created an ID program in our church where we actually help to pay for IDs for people who are coming out of prison because they don't have the money, right? They're given a bus token when they leave and they're not given any resources probably outside of that. So we work with the local DMV and we work with the local municipality to get people registered to drive, because in order for folks to be able to go to work, they got to be able to have a driver's license. In order for them to have a driver's license, to get to work, they got to be able to have transportation. So we got to be able to help people with soft skills. We got to do training workshops whereby we teach ex-offenders, what it means, how to use the internet, teaching them about social media engagement, interviewing skills. So there are just a whole lot of things that I think that the church could do, but the church itself has to be intentional and it has to be something that's a part of its mission that it wants to do to be able to, I think, be a light and that balm in Gilead for these folks who are really looking to repair themselves and to redeem themselves. And then we got to work with people spiritually as well, because part of the church is helping with character development. And I think that, we have a great opportunity to really help to retool people so they can be not just productive members of society, but they can be great corporate citizens to the world and the community to which they will be returning. So those are just a few things that I wanted to share.
That was a lot, and that was wonderful. I was writing down everything that you were saying, and I don't want us, as some of us, we have a lot of pastors on, there's no reason to feel overwhelmed because it's not so much that your church with its leaders have to be able to do all these things. I recently partnered with an organization that I'm able to give her, guide her. And I told her how to get computers donated to the church, and she was able to get 6 computers donated from the Trinity School right here in Hartford. But she's going to be teaching those soft training skills, resume writing, and use our space as partnership spaces for other organizations to come in and, provide those services. So There are many different ways to do that, but you are doing phenomenal. Wow. I thank God for you. I really do. Thank God for you. And Pat, you have been patient, and I thank you for being patient. Pat has been doing work with GIA, which is the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. And recently, the Clean Slate Bill has been passed, and they did a lot of work from beginning to end. And I want Pat to just take the floor right now and talk to us about GIA and the Clean Slate.
Thanks so much, Pastor and Pastor Gaston. And if I could start with a point of personal privilege. Pastor Gaston, I don't know what's more jaw-dropping for me, the story of what you've achieved and risen above and continue to do, or what you went through. And except the first one inspires me and the second one enrages me. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, by the way, I was at the tail end of a 7-year co-taught course at the Div School called Leadership in Public Ministry that unfortunately they abolished. And all I remember is the arrest. I was actually on the downswing getting out of the Div School. And also you're ministering, you're making my city better. I'm born and bred in Bridgeport. Wow. And more than that, you're pastoring about a mile north from where I was born and bred and buttered, and learned everything I know about the gospel down in the East End. And so I'm just like, I'm tingling to hear you and meet you. I want to say that. So also a full confession, which is that I have to give credit tonight where it's due. And so I'm not the coordinator, I'm the mentoring organizer. That's a fancy term they came up for the oldest guy in the room for Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. So among other things, I train and supervise a staff of organizers. But I work for 2 pastors on the call, Pastor Hugh Hamilton and Pastor Bob Knabel, and their leaders. And I'm hoping pretty soon to be working for Pastor Crystal and Mr. Steve Derby and Mr. Silver Welch. And they're at the gate of GIA. And so I want to say that the old model might be like there's a separate community organization and the churches are supportive. That's not what GIA is. They are GIA, North United Methodist Church and West Hartford United Methodist Church. And as of Tuesday morning, we were 46 churches, synagogues, and mosques in the Greater Hartford area. And as of Tuesday night, we're now 47, and we'll be hitting 50 pretty soon. But our work on Clean Slate was an assist. And I want to be very clear about that. It was a campaign that was started 3 years ago by our sister organization down actually in Pastor Gaston's neck of the woods called Connect, Congregations Organized for a New Connecticut. And Connect just had and I was one of their organizers years ago. Connect just had its 10th anniversary meeting. And as a matter of fact, on that night, they went from 37 institutions to 38 with a congregation joining. And along with some key legislators, and especially State Senator Gary Winfield in New Haven, it was a 3-year fight in which they lost twice. And finally, with the help of GIA on board and the ACLU as well and other coalition partners, Clean Slate, one of the strongest Clean Slate bills in the country, passed in the Connecticut legislature last session. So Clean Slate is an automatic erasure of criminal records for certain convictions after a set period of time for people who remained free of the criminal justice system upon their release. And it includes Clean Slate in Connecticut includes all misdemeanors and several classes of felonies as well. And folks' records are erased clean in the case of the misdemeanors after 7 years and of the felonies after 10. And excluded are sex and family violence and firearm charges. And I apologize. Like I say, GIA did an assist on this to Connect, which is in its 10th year. I believe the number of Connecticut residents directly impacted, you might say freed to some extent from the scarlet letter, I believe is 330,000 residents. Wow. And so what I would add, that's really all I have to say, that it was a group of churches and synagogues and mosques that fight together for justice. And because we're together, we win. And so with just a couple of minutes I have left, I want to address the crisis. Pastors won't be surprised to hear me on my soapbox on this. The context for GIA and Connect is the crisis that our churches are in, the scandal that our churches are in, which is that a number of our churches, when you ask them what happens outside the four walls where God is in his creation, what do you do? The answer is nothing. But for a very large number of our churches, the answer is only charity and outreach and the attempt to meet needs. And so it's the charitable part of the Good Samaritan story. And I respect our congregations for doing that. We teach in GIA that it takes 2 feet to walk on the church's social ministry. And the first is the meeting of needs and the helping hand. But the second has to do with justice and power. And all the soup kitchens in the world don't get us to justice. Power does. And so the crisis is even greater because even beyond those congregations, the next model is really the pastor is the activist in public life, not the people. Mm-hmm. Or the church's public life happens through 2 activists. And they've got a lot of bumper stickers on their car, but they don't actually represent or move the whole church. Mm-hmm. And so that's the crisis and the scandal within which an organization like GIA came to be. And I want to, and with Pastor Gaston, with all due respect, and I can't understate that enough, overstate it, the examples that you gave, to my mind, listening, were all on the worthy charitable side of how to take care of folks coming out of the prison pipeline, right? But the other side of that is to beat the enemy and get a social change that's a change not in the hearts of our formerly incarcerated people, but the structures and systems of oppression and racism. Mm-hmm. And so Clean Slate's a prime example of what happens when, despite their differences, despite a gamut of egos, despite doctrinal differences, which are legitimate, despite differences over larger push button issues like human sexuality or, Israel and Palestine, 47 institutions actually work together and are building relationships with each other. Mm-hmm. And that helps us think about winning the battle for justice and basic change. And it ain't over. And 2 very quick examples is that something that GIA won last year that we identified first and brought to fruition, and the first bill that Governor Lamont signed, is that we abolished something in the state of Connecticut that was only one of 2 states in the nation that allowed this, called welfare liens, which in its simplest terms, any public assistance that Connecticut residents receive by the state is looked upon not as a grant, but a loan that must be repaid. And the state keeps track. And we found this out through one of our tenant leaders when we were kicking one of 3 major slumlords out of Hartford. She was part of a class action suit and got a letter the next day from the state of Connecticut saying, just a reminder that you owe the state $85,000, and had the receipts, by the way. It's really pretty bizarre and Twilight Zone. Well, 2 things in the apartheid state known as Connecticut. The first is that we found out that the prison system has liens, and that wasn't covered in our bill that abolished welfare liens. And so in the coming months, we'll be researching it. And the second thing is, you may have noticed that the state GOP has landed on a strategy that they've been using to good effect for the last 50 years called the Southern Strategy. Mm. And the Connecticut version of it is that if you raise the proper dog whistles and strike fear in the hearts of white people, you'll get their vote. So I don't know if you've noticed the press meetings happening. There was one night before last in Trumbull where the GOP is pushing the crisis in urban crime and juvenile crime, and that our young people are running loose. And I started keeping a file of articles that Stefanowski, who's going to run for governor again, ran in the Connecticut Post, and then State Senator Kevin Kelly, and then there's a state rep named Fishbein, who's got a dog and pony show going around to towns to host forums on this crisis in youth crime. And I guess I'm assuming I don't have to talk to this group of folks about that has to do with race and with appealing to folks' most basic fears and instincts. And interestingly, in the Trumbull meeting, Pastor Gaston, he got challenged and he didn't have many allies in the room.
Wow.
And folks went after him on the source of his information because the information is skewed. But here comes a major theme of the Republicans in the next round of elections for governor and all the state offices, which is this appeal to the supposed crisis that we're having in youth crime. And a couple of my organizers and leaders went to a prior meeting in Windsor, and one of them reported back, and it was kind of just a text between us that was designed to be funny, like we were laughing at it. But she said, here's some of the takeaways from the meeting in Windsor. In other words, this is what people in the audience or the speakers said, which is our trouble started happening when we stopped locking up 7-year-olds. Black Lives Matter is responsible for the spate of car thefts in Glastonbury and Windsor. And the youth prison in Connecticut is like a palace and a church, and it's easy living in there. And there's about 7 or 8 other things that came up in the meeting. So GIA has a group of leaders now and pastors exploring, will we, whether, should we, and in what way will we respond and react to this attempt? And of course, part of the attempt is to say, well, that's because of all the progressive legislation that was passed in Connecticut over the last 2 or 3 years. This is why we have the uptick in crime. So the battle's never over, right? But what you need for the battle is an army. And the army has to have power at its disposal, trained organizers, dues paying institutions, core groups of leaders. So just quick, last end of the story. When GIA did its part to help connect, line up the votes on clean slate, we had an action by Zoom last November, a year ago, last month, with 17 legislators in the greater Hartford area to pin them on both welfare liens and clean slate. And we pinned 16 and a half of the 17. GIA had 1,100 of its members on that Zoom call. So the question is, if you want justice, we can't get justice even through one parish, right? One congregation. We need to aggregate and grow in trust with each other and take the time to do it. And the last thing I want to say is, sorry if I'm going on too long, by the way, stop me. But here comes a list of my cell phone number and email for this reason, that I'm not sure where all of you are based, but I spend about 2 days a week working statewide in Connecticut to try to move all over, kind of like Johnny Appleseed, to foster recreations of Connect and GIA elsewhere. So, for example, in the next 4 to 6 months, we'll have a sponsoring committee of clergy covering all of Southeast Connecticut and committing in the coming years to build a power organization like GIA and Connect. And I'm starting work in New Britain and have some spade work going in Willimantic as well. And so I'm available. The Connect, GIA doesn't pay me enough. They only pay me for 2 days a week. And I work 3 because it's so much fun. But I am available 1 or 2 days a week, especially after the first of the year, to help you if you are a pastor or a lay leader in your congregation. Let's get the organizing going all across this crazy state. So thanks, and happy to take any questions if we have time, by Zoom or directly if we have time.
Thank you so much, Pat. We definitely, oh my goodness. I'm so glad you said that, because I think I've been sharing this with you. It would be remarkable to have something formulate in upper New York area, so that the same laws that are being changed in Connecticut can also be changed in New York. If there are any, we are over our time. We are over our time. But if there is anyone who'd like to ask an important question, I think we covered it. I'm going to ask if you can all put your, if you don't mind putting your email addresses in the chat, and that way I can communicate with you stuff like Gia's website, stuff like Harmony's website, our next Harmony conference event discussion. If you don't mind sharing your email, then we can keep you posted with upcoming discussions and events.
Pat, I had a quick question, if you will. Thank you so very much for sharing. And you do look incredibly familiar from Yale Divinity School time in 2010. So I think this is a great serendipity that we find ourselves here. I know that, of course, a lot what happened at the state level would sort of trump, sort of things that may happen at the municipal level. But are there some things that, municipal governments actually could do by virtue of maybe ordinances to help to address this big structural issue dealing with mass incarceration, and with this issue in particular, maybe helping formerly incarcerated persons get a certain segment of jobs in that community? Maybe there's something you can work with the local legislatures on. Maybe talk to these ministers and pastors that might be a part of a particular location. Let's say they're from Bridgeport, that they could galvanize and meet with your elected officials, your mayor, and help to change policies at that level as well, that you find to be helpful, or you think that more so at the state level is probably much more effective?
Pastor, that's a good question, and I'd have to put my thinking cap on it without too much immediately, but it's got to happen at every level in Connecticut, state, regional, and local, number one. And number two, I didn't have time to say, but I left organizing for 2 years, about 9 and 8 years ago, kind of us frustrated and angry, trying to figure out how to make it happen better. And I was stringing together jobs. And I spent 6 months as the job developer for Isaiah 61:1 in Bridgeport. Wow. And I have never been so powerless in my life. As you know, you go around to businesses and supermarkets and say, hi, here's my card. And I'm working for 80 incarcerated people in halfway houses. Think you might want to hire them? And the answer is no. So it was an extraordinarily frustrating experience. I wonder if through the summer and other hiring programs, the cities could prioritize ex-offenders so that they get something on their resume in the future, right? And then also supplement or beef up the funding for the existing groups like Strive. I don't know if that's still out there, Isaiah 61. And then can the municipalities, I would think, could join in on some of the action campaigns. I mean, I don't know if Ganem testified on Clean Slate, but it would have been great if he did.
I think he did.
Yeah, I think he does well. Yeah. So yeah, good question that we should all think about, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No additional questions. I just want to thank our guests. Thank you so much, Dr. Gaston. Thank you so much, Pat Spear. We truly appreciate your expertise and your time. I'm a strong believer that we need to be educated and aware of the issues, and these type of dialogues and conversations are extremely necessary for us to move in this work. So I do appreciate your time on tonight. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to pray us out if there are no additional questions. You all will join me in prayer. Liberating and defender, our Savior, our God. Lord, we thank you that you have gathered us in this holy conversation to empower us, to educate us, to be change agents, or to bring liberation to our sisters and our brothers who may find themselves wrongly accused behind bars in systems that have just been unfair through generations. Lord God, we're asking that you would continue to give us the courage, to give us the ideas, to give us the voice, to join us together with the right partners, with the right organizations, to allow us to unite and collaborate and work together in harmony so that we can be a force, so that we can move forward as your church, as leaders in our community, to open up doors, to be repairers of the breach. Oh God, we're asking that your kingdom of love and of justice and of liberation come. Let it come to those who find themselves behind bars. We're praying for each person, oh God, that find themselves in a jail cell right now. We're praying for those who are wrongly accused and who are innocent. We're praying for their minds and their families. We're asking you, Holy Spirit, to go and to empower them and to strengthen them. And Lord, provide the resources that they need. Break free, Lord God, our sisters and our brothers. We're believing in your mighty hand, but we will not sit dormant. We're asking that you would continue to activate us, continue to send us, and show us the way forward. And Lord, as we move with your power of the Holy Spirit, we will give you all the glory. We will walk humbly with you, loving justice and loving kindness, depending on you because you are our present help and you're mighty in battle. So we put our faith and our strength comes only from you. We thank you, God. I ask that you bless these leaders, that you continue to give them the strength and the resources that they need. In the holy name of Jesus Christ, we humbly pray. And we thank you, Lord God, for this evening. Amen.
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 Thanks, Pastor.
Thank you all. This was so great.
I'm sorry, Reverend. I didn't want to interrupt you. Please forgive me.
No, I was saying that this was incredibly great, and I hope that we all can stay in touch. So is this going to be somewhere we can actually access this? Because I want to go through and see who was on here so I can be in touch.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The Harmony Conference is at the door. The Harmony Conference website is at the door of being complete, and all the different discussions will be posted on the website. So I'll keep you posted when it's done.
Good night. Very good job. Good job, Pastor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.